Dear leader, good morning, afternoon, evening, doesn't matter where you are. Um, let's talk about leadership. Muhyiddin Yassin, the Malaysian uh, prime minister, resigns. In Zambia, a new election, a new president takes over, and an old president sends a statement that essentially says, I am out. Thank you. It was really great to have some time with you as my people. Drama in Tigray, where even today there's still a bit of a struggle around how do we make sure that we stop the war. Essentially, that's the kind of conversation that's happening. Afghanistan, under new government, the Taliban has taken over, and the current president runs away. Then you look across the ocean into the US, and Joe Biden is essentially defending the decision to get out of Afghanistan in an 18-minute, maybe longer conversation. Bolsonaro still struggling with issues of COVID-19 in Brazil, but also having to justify his position as the president, prime minister in Brazil. Then in Japan, the president is apologizing, wanting to resign because he hasn't really done a great job with the Olympics. But then we take it into soccer. You have Lionel Messi not being able to be paid for and being released by the team, but being taken over by PSG. And while we're there in South Africa, the Orlando Pirates coach resigns after many months of really struggling performance with the team. So I could go on in terms of the different examples of all the different shifts and moves. I've been watching Cyril Ramaphosa and the closing of the Zondo Commission, and him sitting there and the Zondo Commission, and him saying, well, this is the end of corruption, and we are now really the end of state capture, and we are now going to just be having normal corruption, he says. So I observe quite a lot every day about leadership and what happens in terms of leadership across the world. And what is beginning to fascinate me, and I don't know what you think, and this is why I put this up. And of course, every morning on a Monday morning, I speak about leadership on my show, Leadership Mondays, with different leaders across the world. I'm curious, what's going on with leadership? What are the patterns that you are noticing about leadership, and how is leadership changing or remaining the same? And as an individual yourself, what are you noticing about your leadership, and how is your leadership shifting, changing, or staying the same? What I'm noticing is two things that really strike me so far. And I'm not saying it's the truth, it's the truth, but it's a version of truth that I'm seeing based on patterns. I'm seeing two things. I'm seeing an extension of something that has been happening. I think in 2019, I spent a lot of time talking about how people are rising in terms of levels of consciousness and paying attention and wanting a lot more to have people accountable to them. So the kind of democracy where we put the name democracy on paper, but we do exactly the opposite, and people are happy to just have people make decisions on their behalf, is kind of shifting, which means many people themselves are taking personal leadership. That's fascinating. And then, of course, came coronavirus, which kind of created a very different dynamic in terms of the relationships between people and leaders, because leaders, for some reason, or elected leaders, because all of us are leaders, elected leaders all of a sudden are getting into a space where they have the power to protect ostensibly the people from the virus and all of those things. 197 countries closing their gates. That's unprecedented, right? That way again. But throughout all of this time, I'm noticing that pattern of, well, there was a bit of a pause in 2020 of people kind of staying back a little bit and saying, okay, we trust you, we trust you. And then middle of 2020, beginning of 2021, okay, we don't know what you're doing now. And then everybody's going back into this rising consciousness, and people actually really uh, literally revolting against being told what to do. So, what does this mean for leadership? What does this mean for you as a leader, recognizing this? And do you agree that there's a pattern? So, that's the first thing I see. The second thing that I'm noticing, which is fascinating for me from a leadership perspective, is how the people in positions of power themselves are, in a way, beginning to also realize they actually don't have as much power as they thought they did. I always say that whenever I see South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on television, noticing how he actually doesn't have a lot of power. Yeah, people think when you're a president of a country, you have all the power, you can do whatever you like, but you can't really, because there's like so many things that are happening around you, so much protocol that technically you are being run through protocol. And this is the same throughout the world. If you look at many presidents, unless they go into a tyrant mode and create a space where they become the sole power holder. There's several countries that are still having that kind of a situation. But in many parts of the world, many elected leaders are subject to essentially rules of balancing. What do they call it? The checks and balances of sorts in terms of making sure that many leaders are doing their job. Of course, we'll talk about corruption a little later at some point. But what I wanted to really reflect on is, given all of this, I'm realizing, oh yeah, last piece, because I think it's been fascinating in South Africa, where we have now the former president Jacob Zuma in prison, in jail, again flexing that muscle. It says, I know it all, I can do it all. I'm a former president, and then the world, countries saying no, you're not. Again, there are obviously, it's a lot more nuanced than that, but just an overall pattern of it. The Haitian story, and the president being shot right in his house. It's crazy, man. It's a very difficult time for people in leadership right now. And with those two perspectives, that says people are awake, and people are not going to be standing around waiting for people or leaders to tell them what to do. And two, the whole idea that as a leader, you don't actually have the power that you think you are. You think you do. What does this represent for you in terms of leadership? What does this represent for you in terms of what you need to develop in a leader as a leadership style that essentially gets you to get things going? Because I think for me, if you ask me that question, I'm saying my answer for that would be, it's then the ability to understand the nuance that essentially goes with being a leader, not having to decide to have to think that there is this one or the other way of being, but it's really, first of all, having to be really, really authentic and going right into the center of who you are and working with the center of who you are, because it's very easy to get lost in all of that. So, but by revealing that human face, by revealing that authenticity, by disclosing to people who you are and what you're all about, let people judge you by who you are, not who they think you are, or who needs to, or what your PR systems and PR mechanisms are creating. I think it's really important today, because then you are able to actually capture a real good audience just from your credibility alone as a human being. And two, I think in doing that, what also really happens is it leverages the whole idea around consciousness and the rising consciousness and talking to people as people. And the whole idea of walking around talking to people as positions, and essentially talking from a high, haughty tower of powerful leadership and written speeches, it's not going to cut it, because people want to connect with real people who they then can feel that they can talk to. But at the same time, in being able to do that, it leads to a third piece. The third piece then becomes, it becomes easier to actually get the mandate from people when they already decide that they trust you, because then they become your PR mechanism. They become the ones that speak on your behalf, and they are the ones anyway that execute on the ground whatever it is that you put up in your long-term plans all over the world, in your long-term plans that you create as a president. So I think that's my reflection around where leadership is right now. But what do you think is the state of leadership for you? What does leadership look like for you? What are some of the interesting challenges that you are experiencing as a leader? And what are some of the suggestions, recommendations? This is not complaining. This is really creating a space to reflect and talk as leaders, as yourself. What are some of your interesting challenges, and what are some of the successes you found from leadership? But most importantly, when you look around the world, what are some of the interesting challenges of leaders that you experience? Just comment and let's share, let's have a conversation. And I'll continue this also on Clubhouse. So follow me on Clubhouse, and every Monday I will be doing a follow-up to the Leadership Mondays program, but I also invite you to check it out. Put it on your diary. Every Monday, 10 o'clock CAT, so Central African Time. I am on Vuonan Radio, speaking, interviewing different leaders from different parts of the world at different levels. I hear that at some point there are some G7 people that might be in that list. I don't know, so I can't tell, because I just show up for the interview. But right now, I'm really interested. What is happening with leadership, in your opinion? Have a good one.